Just like a fire hose.
Geoducks, the unique clam that's become a popular and pricey menu item in China, is on the tariff list, along with salmon, crab, and lobster. Taylor Shellfish, the state's largest producer of farmed shellfish, says they're concerned about the impact the proposed tariffs may have on sales in China. Half of all the geoduck harvested by Taylor is exported, mostly to China and Hong Kong. China's proposed tariff came after President Trump's announcement of new tariffs on Chinese products. China's proposed tariff came after President Trump's announcement of new tariffs on Chinese products. China's response prompted the state's Department of Natural Resources to send out letters to geoduck companies who won auctions to harvest the wild clams on state-owned aquatic lands this summer. But the auction happened before the tariffs were announced. If the tariffs end up hurting geoduck sales, those companies would be allowed to get some of their money back. The state says it's offering the relief because the tariffs could mean an artificial change in the market driven by politics. And if the market suffers, the harvesters should not. The only other time the state has offered a refund on geoduck auctions was when China banned the sale of all West Coast geoducks after one sample tested positive for arsenic in 2013. In Olympia, Drew Mikkelsen, King 5 News.